The restaurant door swung open with a violent jingle of bells. Sam, the owner, looked up from the counter and felt his stomach drop. A tall, well-dressed black man had just walked in, his confident stride and broad shoulders commanding attention in the segregated Louisville diner. It was 1963, and Kentucky establishments like Sam's still operated under unspoken rules about who could sit where, if at all. The stranger moved toward an empty booth, seemingly oblivious to the sudden silence that blanketed the room. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks stopped clinking against plates. Even the cook peered through the service window, eyes wide with apprehension. Before continuing, if you're watching on television or mobile, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching my videos from. I want to know how far they're reaching, thank you. "Betty," Sam hissed at his waitress, nodding toward the newcomer. "Handle this, quick." Betty Wilson had been working at Sam's diner for 7 years, ever since she dropped out of high school. At 25, she was the sole provider for her ailing mother and younger brother. This job was everything to her family. She clutched her notepad tightly, knuckles turning white as she approached the man who now threatened her livelihood. The restaurant had a strict policy, no service to colored folks. Sam had made that abundantly clear on her first day. "Sir," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, but we don't—" She stopped when the man looked up, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected gentleness. For a moment, something flashed in her mind, a vague recognition. Had she seen him somewhere before? "I'll have a coffee and your breakfast special," he said, his voice smooth and melodic, with a distinct Louisville accent that surprised her. "Been training since 5 this morning and I'm starving." Betty's hand trembled. "Sir, I can't serve you here." Her voice cracked, shame burning in her chest even as the words left her mouth. It's the rules." The man's expression didn't change. He simply folded his hands on the table. "What's your name, miss?" "Betty." "Well, Betty, my name is Cassius Clay. Perhaps you've heard of me?" A hint of a smile played on his lips. Betty's eyes widened. Everyone in Louisville knew Cassius Clay, the Olympic gold medalist, the rising heavyweight star, the local boy whose name was beginning to echo across America. The city's native son sat before her, and she was refusing to serve him coffee. Sam appeared behind her, his presence heavy and intimidating. "Is there a problem here?" His tone carried a warning to both of them. "No problem at all," Clay responded, his gaze never leaving Betty's face. "This young lady was just explaining your establishment's policy. I understand completely." He stood, towering over both of them. "But before I go, may I ask you something, Betty?" She nodded, unable to speak, as the weight of dozens of eyes bore down on her back. "Do you think this is right?" 4 simple words, spoken softly, yet they crashed through the diner like thunder. Betty felt her world tilt. In that moment, she saw her father's face, a man who taught her to judge people by their character, not their skin, before cancer took him when she was 12. What would he think of her now? She couldn't continue. The tears that threatened to spill would cost her this job, her mother's medicine, her brother's chance at college. Cassius Clay nodded, understanding everything she couldn't say. "It's okay. I'll go." He placed a crisp $5 bill on the table. "For the trouble." As he turned to leave, Sam stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "We don't need your money, boy." The slur hung in the air like poison. Clay stopped, his back still turned. The entire diner held its breath, waiting for an explosion that never came. Instead, he turned slowly, his face a mask of dignity. "You know," he said, looking not at Sam but at Betty, "I'm fighting Sonny Liston next month. They say he's unbeatable. They say I don't stand a chance." His voice carried throughout the silent diner. "But that's what they've been saying my whole life, that I don't belong, that I should know my place." He smiled then, a radiant, defiant smile. "But I'm going to shock the world. And when I do, I hope it helps people see each other differently." With that, he walked out, leaving the $5 untouched on the table. Betty stared at it, feeling the weight of a choice pressing down on her. In that moment, something shifted inside her, small but significant, like the first crack in a dam. Little did she know that this encounter would change not just her life, but the course of history, in ways she couldn't yet imagine. 3 weeks passed. Betty continued her shifts at Sam's diner, but something had changed. Each time she turned away a black customer, each time she served the whites-only section, a small voice inside her grew louder. The encounter with Cassius Clay had planted a seed that was slowly taking root, cracking the foundation of everything she'd been taught to accept. February 25th, 1964. The diner was unusually crowded that evening. Everyone had gathered around the small television set Sam had installed in the corner for special occasions. Tonight was special indeed. Cassius Clay was fighting Sonny Liston for the heavyweight championship of the world. The odds were 7-1 against Clay. Most patrons had bet against him, laughing as they placed their money. "That mouthy kid is about to learn his lesson," Sam declared, counting the betting slips. "Liston's going to put him in his place." Betty wiped down tables silently, listening to the commentary as the fighters prepared to enter the ring. When Clay appeared on screen, dancing and shouting his predictions, something tightened in her chest. She remembered his eyes that day in the diner, confident yet wounded, powerful yet vulnerable. The fight began, and to everyone's shock, Clay dominated from the opening bell. His speed was supernatural, his footwork mesmerizing. He danced around Liston like a ghost, landing punches at will while barely getting hit. The diner crowd grew increasingly quiet as round after round went by. "He's actually winning," someone whispered in disbelief. By the 6th round, Liston was exhausted and injured. When the bell rang for the 7th, he didn't get up from his stool. The referee raised Clay's hand in victory as the new champion danced around the ring shouting, "I shook up the world! I shook up the world!" The diner erupted in a mixture of disbelief, anger, and reluctant admiration. Money changed hands as bets were settled. Sam turned off the television in disgust, but Betty couldn't take her eyes from the now dark screen. Clay had done exactly what he said he would do, shocked the world. And somewhere deep inside her, something shifted again. The next morning, Betty arrived at work to find a crowd gathered outside the diner. As she approached, she saw what had drawn their attention. The whites-only sign that had hung in the window for as long as she could remember lay shattered on the sidewalk. Sam stood in the doorway, his face pale with rage. "Vandals!" he spat, "probably inspired by that loudmouth Clay." He turned to Betty. "Clean this up before we open." As she knelt to gather the broken glass, a familiar voice spoke from above her. "Let me help you with that." Betty looked up to see Cassius Clay, no, Muhammad Ali as he now called himself, standing there in an immaculate suit, offering his hand to help her up. A crowd had gathered, murmuring in excitement at the sight of the new heavyweight champion. "Mr. Clay, I mean, Mr. Ali," she stammered, ignoring his outstretched hand. "What are you doing here?" "I came for that breakfast," he said with a smile, "and to see if anything's changed." Sam pushed through the gathering crowd. "Nothing's changed. Sign or no sign, we serve who we want to serve." He glared at Ali. "Champion or not, you're not welcome here." Betty felt dozens of eyes on her, the crowd, the other staff, and most intensely Muhammad Ali himself. In his gaze, she saw not judgment but a question. What will you do now? The memory of her father surfaced again, stronger this time. He had always told her that there would come moments in life that defined who she was, moments that required courage. She thought of her mother, who had taught her to treat others with dignity. What lesson was she teaching her younger brother by her silence? "I'll serve him," Betty said, her voice trembling but clear. Sam's head whipped toward her. "What did you say?" "I said I'll serve him." Stronger now, and anyone else who walks through that door. You'll lose your job, Sam warned, his voice low and dangerous. Betty thought of her family, of the bills piling up at home. She thought of her future, suddenly uncertain. Then she looked at Ali, standing tall and dignified despite the hatred directed at him, and found her answer. Then I lose my job. A hush fell over the crowd. No one moved. Then from the back a voice called out, "I'll eat wherever the champ eats." It was Joe Cartwright, the local mechanic who had been coming to Sam's for 15 years. Another voice joined in. "Me too!" Mrs. Henderson, the librarian. One by one, voices rose in support. These weren't outsiders or troublemakers. They were regulars, people Sam had served for years, people whose money kept his business afloat. Sam looked around, his face contorting as he calculated the cost of his prejudice against the prospect of his diner's survival. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat. "Fine," he muttered. "But this is on your head, Betty." He retreated inside, leaving the door open behind him. Ali smiled at Betty, genuine respect in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. "No," Betty replied, finding strength in her voice for the first time in years. "Thank you for coming back." Day. As they walked into the diner together, Betty sensed that this was more than just a meal being served. It was the beginning of something new. For her, for the diner, and perhaps in some small way, for Louisville itself. What she couldn't know was that the true test of her courage was still to come. Word spread quickly through Louisville about the incident at Sam's diner. For some, Betty became a traitor, a race betrayer who had chosen the wrong side. For others, she was a quiet hero, someone who had taken a small but significant stand. The consequences came swiftly. The first brick crashed through her mother's front window 2 nights later, a note attached with a crude threat. Betty swept up the glass without showing her mother the note. The phone calls started next, heavy breathing followed by whispered obscenities that left her shaking. Meanwhile, Sam's diner experienced its own transformation. Some customers stopped coming, but new ones appeared. Black families who had never before had a place to eat downtown. White customers who brought their black friends or colleagues. The atmosphere was tense at first. Awkward silences punctuated by hostile glares. But slowly, meal by meal, conversation by conversation, something remarkable began to happen. The diner became a neutral ground, a rare space where the rigid segregation of 1964 Louisville softened, if only slightly. Sam watched it all with grim resignation. He didn't embrace the change, but neither did he fight it anymore. The money still came in. Different pockets perhaps, but the same color green. Betty caught him sometimes, watching the mixed clientele with a puzzled expression, as if witnessing an alien phenomenon he couldn't quite comprehend. For Betty, the weight of her decision grew heavier each day. Her brother came home from school with a black eye. Her mother's usual pharmacy suddenly couldn't fill her prescriptions. The landlord mentioned that he might need to increase their rent. Times were tough, after all. One evening, as Betty was closing up the diner alone, 3 men entered just as she was about to lock the door. She recognized them immediately, local troublemakers who had been vocal about the diner's new policy. "We hear you're serving anybody these days," the tallest one said, his breath reeking of whiskey. "That true, Betty?" She tried to keep her voice steady. "We're closed now. You'll have to come back tomorrow." The second man slammed his hand on the counter. "That's not what we asked." Fear rose in Betty's throat as they surrounded her. There was no one to call for help. Sam had left hours ago, and the street outside was deserted. "Please," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "I need to get home to my mother." "Your mother should have taught you better," the third man said, reaching for her arm. "Taught you to stick with your own kind." The door burst open, the bell clanging violently. All 4 heads turned to see a group of young men enter, black and white, led by Betty's younger brother Tommy and Muhammad Ali's cousin Corky. "Everything okay in here, Betty?" Tommy asked. his voice deeper than she remembered, his lanky frame suddenly seeming taller. The three troublemakers sized up the newcomers. Despite outnumbering them, they seemed to lose their appetite for confrontation. "We were just leaving," the tall one muttered, pushing past the group. As the door closed behind them, Betty collapsed into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "Tommy, what are you doing here?" Her 17-year-old brother shrugged. "Corky and I have been taking turns watching the diner at closing time. Ali suggested it." "Ali?" Betty looked at Corky in surprise. "My cousin worries about you," Corky explained. "Says you've got more courage than most men he knows, and that kind of courage needs protecting sometimes." Tears filled Betty's eyes, not from fear now, but from the realization that she wasn't alone. The stand she had taken had created ripples, connecting her to people she might never have known otherwise. The next morning, Betty arrived at the diner to find an envelope addressed to her. Inside was a check for $500, a small fortune in 1964, and a note, "For your mother's medicine and your brother's education, some fights can't be won alone. Muhammad Ali." Betty stared at the check, her vision blurring. The gesture was more than financial assistance. It was validation that her sacrifice mattered, that the harder path was the right one. That afternoon, a reporter from the Louisville Courier-Journal came to the diner. Betty had declined interviews before, but something told her it was time to speak. The article appeared the next day. "Waitress stands her ground. How one woman and a boxing champion changed a local diner." The story was picked up by wire services, appearing in newspapers across the country. Letters began arriving at the diner, some filled with hate, but many more expressing support, sharing similar stories of small stands against injustice. Some included donations for Betty's family. Others offered her mother treatment at hospitals outside Kentucky. 3 days after the article appeared, Betty arrived at work to find Sam waiting for her, looking more serious than usual. "I got a call this morning," he said without preamble. "From the mayor's office. They're considering an ordinance to ban segregation in all city businesses." He paused, studying her face. "They want you to speak at the hearing." Betty felt a wave of panic. "Me? I'm nobody. I'm just a waitress." Sam's expression softened slightly, the first genuine emotion she'd seen from him in weeks. "Not anymore, you're not. You're the waitress who stood up to her boss and served Muhammad Ali." He shook his head. "Never thought my diner would be famous for something like this." "Are you angry?" Betty asked, suddenly needing to know. Sam was quiet for a long moment. "I was," he admitted. "But then something strange happened. My grandson, he's 6, asked me why some people couldn't eat in my restaurant, and I realized I didn't have an answer that made any sense." He met her eyes. "I'm too old to change completely, Betty. But maybe it's time for things to be different." It wasn't a transformation or an apology, but it was something, an acknowledgement that the ground was shifting. For Betty, it was enough. The real victory, however, came 2 weeks later, when her mother walked into the diner for the first time. Martha Wilson had been too ill to leave the house for months, but with her new medication, paid for by Ali's generosity and supplemented by donations from across the country, she felt strong enough to see the place that had become the center of so much attention. The diner fell silent as Betty led her mother to a booth, the same one where Ali had sat that first day. Martha looked around at the mixed clientele, the absence of segregation signs, her daughter moving confidently among the tables. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered, squeezing Betty's hand. And in that moment, Betty knew that no matter what came next, the ongoing threats, the uncertain future, the long road ahead for Louisville and the nation, she had found her voice. It had started with a simple question from a man who refused to accept the world as it was. "Do you think this is right?" She had answered with her actions, and those actions had spoken louder than she ever could have imagined. Spring turned to summer, and the changes in Louisville continued, small, incremental, but undeniable. The mayor's anti-segregation ordinance passed by a narrow margin, making the city one of the first in Kentucky to officially desegregate its businesses. Betty spoke at the hearing, her voice shaking but her words clear, as she described that first encounter with Ali and the journey that followed. Ali himself had returned to the diner several times, each visit drawing crowds and cameras. He brought friends, other athletes, musicians, civil rights activists, turning Sam's humble establishment into an unlikely symbol of progress. Sam grudgingly admitted that business had never been better, though he still occasionally muttered about the way things used to be. On a warm August evening in 1964, Betty was surprised to receive a call at home. It was Muhammad Ali's manager, inviting her to attend Ali's upcoming fight in Louisville as his personal guest. She almost declined. Who would take care of her mother? But Martha insisted, saying she hadn't felt this well in years. The night of the fight, Betty found herself seated ringside, surrounded by celebrities and officials who all seemed to know her story. The crowd roared as Ali entered the arena, his charisma filling the space. He spotted Betty and pointed to her, mouthing, "Thank you," before turning to face his opponent. After his victory, in the midst of celebrating supporters, Ali made his way to Betty. Cameras flashed as he embraced her, an image that would appear in Life magazine the following week. "You know," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "some people think I'm brave for what I do in the ring, but real courage, that's what you showed that day in the diner. You risked everything." Betty shook her head. "You gave me the strength. I just didn't know I had it until then." Ali smiled. "That's how it always works. We never know what we're capable of until we're tested." He looked around at the crowd, at the journalists recording their every word. "This fight, it's bigger than boxing. It's about dignity. It's about looking another human being in the eye and seeing them, really seeing them." 3 months later, Betty received a letter from a small college in Massachusetts offering her a full scholarship, arranged, she later learned, through Ali's connections. At 32, she became the oldest freshman in her class, studying law with the dream of fighting for civil rights through the legal system. Tommy followed 2 years later, his education secured by a combination of scholarships and the trust fund that had grown from the donations sent to the Waitress who stood up. Sam's diner became a landmark of sorts, mentioned in civil rights tours of the city. Sam himself never fully embraced the cause, but he did something perhaps more meaningful. He hired the diner's first black waitress in 1966, a young woman named Evelyn, who would eventually become the manager when Sam retired. As for Muhammad Ali, his journey was just beginning. His refusal to be drafted into the Vietnam War would cost him his title and nearly 3 years of his career. Through it all, he and Betty maintained a friendship, their paths having crossed at a pivotal moment for both. Decades later, in 2001, a journalist interviewed an elderly Betty Wilson for a documentary about Ali's early years. By then, Betty had become a respected civil rights attorney, with cases argued before the Supreme Court. When asked what she had learned from her experience, her answer was simple. "Courage isn't about being fearless," she said, her voice still clear despite her 82 years. "It's about being terrified and taking the step anyway, because it's right. Ali taught me that. He didn't just shake up the world of boxing, he shook up my world, showed me that one person's stand can ripple outward in ways you can never predict." The documentary ended with footage of a reunion between Betty and Ali, both now elderly, at the opening of the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville. Despite his Parkinson's disease, Ali's eyes still sparkled with the same intelligence and mischief that had challenged Betty that day in 1963. They didn't need words anymore. Their shared journey had long since transcended language. As the camera panned away, viewers could see a photograph prominently displayed in the center's civil rights section. A young waitress and a heavyweight champion standing together in a small diner, changing history one cup of coffee at a time. If you made it this far and felt every word, don't leave without subscribing and commenting where you're watching me from. If this truly touched you, give back, comment, subscribe. Come be part of this family with me until the next video.